Kia ora koutou katoa, good morning, and thank you all for getting up early and making an effort to come on in here. As I came in the room, someone said to me, there are young people here, and the point that they were making was that we don't often see young people at a community engagement on important council issues, so I'd like to particularly acknowledge the fact that you've made the effort to come along. We want to know how better to engage with all of the citizens of Christchurch so that we can actually make the right choices for our city as we face some difficult times. And we've called them smart choices. I kind of don't like the word smart so much, but sometimes I don't get my way all the time. It's making the right choices, and some of those choices that we're confronted with are pretty hard choices, and a lot of people have got some preconceptions about what council does and what it doesn't do. And people often have quite a clear understanding of what we do, but actually don't realise the extent and the breadth of what we do or how much those things cost. So we decided that probably the best way to enter into a public consultation or discussion or engagement around our financial situation was to start at the level of explaining to people what we now understand to be the truth of our financial situation. I don't think any of us were quite clear exactly what the extent was when we were elected exactly 1 year ago, just over, I think today is actually the anniversary of our first council meeting as a brand new council when we got sworn in exactly a year ago today. So in that year, we have spent the time getting to understand the true extent of our financial situation. I know that on one of the suggestion whiteboards the other day, somebody, apart from putting get rid of the mayor as a problem suggestion, did suggest that it would be a good idea if we stop bringing in consultants. And I think it probably will be time to stop bringing in consultants, but we needed consultants to actually go through our books with a fine-tooth comb so that we could live up to a commitment that we all made before our election to open the books. And we couldn't do that without external support. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which I'll go through during the course of this session. But I think that the main reason is that we needed to have fresh eyes that were able to look at the information that had been collated over the previous wee while, that had formed the basis of the 3-year plan that the previous council signed off on. Obviously, the detail of the cost-sharing agreement, which wasn't known to us when we were elected either, and come up with us with a best set of options that we would have in order to get ourselves through the next 10 years, which is the long-term plan framework. But actually, we've got a much longer time frame that we've got to have our focus on. So that's why we brought in Korda Metha, and that's why we brought in Cameron Partners. It was so that when we started this level of public engagement around our long-term plan and our financial strategy, we would be in a position not just to go out with the problems, that we would be able to show what solutions we had in our toolbox and enable people to contribute positively to the discussion about what the smart choices, what the right choices should be. So a little bit now about what we need to, what we spent on, but actually go back a slide because I forgot to mention it because I didn't turn around. It is a very handy graphic that they put the up to $800 to $900 million in that black circle. I call it the big black hole. And the big black hole in our budget hits in 2017 to 19. And I think there's something significant about that year as well, and another reason why the consultants were particularly helpful, and that is that a lot of what was not clear in the 3-year plan, which of course only went to 2016, 2017, so it only went to that financial year, the real problems didn't emerge until the following year. And it was interesting reading back on some of the submissions that was made. A former councillor, David Close, made a submission warning that we were far too close to the threshold of the income to debt ratios that we're allowed to have, or the debt that we're allowed to have against our income. under the different funding requirements that we have. And he said we were sailing very close to the wind with only a 3% gap. We now know that we go over in 2017 to 19, and we go over between $800 to $900 million, and it depends on a whole range of factors coming together. So that's your worst case scenario. We're hoping we're not having to solve for that amount, but we have to, with responsibility, look to ways to solve to that amount. So, on to the next slide. It tells us what we spend money on, and I won't describe the quantum of money that we spend on sewage like I did the other day, which did get a laugh but wouldn't look very good online. It's a lot, loads of money, and you can imagine what I did say. But when I put that number up, $456 million every year just on sewage, it starts to quantify the extent of the expenditure in terms of running a modern city with the expectations that we have today. And it's been interesting, even the combining of the Akaroa District Council with Christchurch City has meant that Christchurch City has had to adapt to some of the changes that affect small councils when you have city residents who are used to central city services paid for large numbers of ratepayers move into small district council areas for retirement purposes and then expect the same city level services. But of course there isn't the rating base to pay for it. And so Christchurch has had to adapt to bringing in a smaller district council into its fold, and there has been, I think some of the costings wouldn't pass the cost-benefit analysis in a smaller city, but because it's able to be shared across a greater rating base, we are better equipped to do so, but not so easily equipped in a post-disaster environment to implement some of the decisions that were made before that occurred. So, these are the challenges that we're having to juggle all the time at the council table. The water supply at 55 million, community support at 64 million. Now, that corporate line at 203 million, I'm afraid that caught my eye. We're going to have a breakdown on each of these online, so you'll be able to go online, click onto them, and then drill down into them, so you get a much more sort of granular look at what each of them represents. But the corporate services includes a particular item, and I can't remember it off the top of my head because my brain's not working this morning so well, but there was an item in it that's huge and it shouldn't have been included in there, but I just don't want you to think that just pays for all the administrative staff. It's got all of our insurance payments in there, it's got a number of other payments in there that do represent the important work that council does. Democracy and governance provides the support for sort of both the council services, all of the engagement services, all of the community board support, and all the different elements of running elections and those sorts of things. Roads and footpaths obviously is huge, 335 million, and of course with the earthquake, one of the benefits that will come from having a lot of the work done under the SCIRT program is that there will be a contribution from central government that there wouldn't have been otherwise over a normal capital renewals program. And you can see them all for yourself. Regulatory services, obviously that's a huge area as well, with all of our building consents and resource consents. Refuse collection, that's gone up significantly, but we are now recycling and trying to reduce our reliance on landfill, so that there's been a trade-off for the increase in that area. Recreation and leisure, this is huge for our community. There are swimming pools, there are and we've got parks and open spaces. We've got economic development, which looks like a small number compared to some of the others. Perhaps cultural and learning services at 91 million, but but that includes our libraries, which of course are the sort of the heart of what the council provides. So you can start to see that that the $1.6 billion that we spend this year, the $358 million of which is funded by rates, the rest by borrowing and by other sources, then you'll see that it's pretty significant in terms of the extent of the work we do. So when we get to the line about reducing services, just think about those different lines. The next slide shows what we inherited, the famous cost-sharing agreement. So I always tell this story about the moment that we were briefed on this. So we were all taken into the council chamber, and it's kind of like lock the doors, and the lawyers were all lined up at the end of the table, and the cost share agreement was circulated around the table. And for all councillors, even though 4 had previously been on the council, it was the first time anyone had seen the actual written cost sharing agreement. And I'll never forget the moment when Vicky Buck said, hang on a minute, can I just read this out, and I want you to tell me that this doesn't mean what I think it means. And it was the line in the cost share agreement that says the council's liable for its contribution to the anchor projects regardless of the amount that it gets back on its insurance recoveries. And the lawyers at the end of the table said, yes, that's what that means. And I think at that moment, all of us were hit with the enormity of the task that we had taken on. And the enormity is that there are a number of people who write on the suggestion boards, who raise this at meetings, send me emails constantly saying, delay the stadium. We can delay the stadium, but only with the agreement of central government. The deal's been signed. So part of putting all of this down for you to see is that, agreements are agreements. People can vary agreements, but only by agreement. And that is something that we believe we have spent the first year building up the relationship with central government, so that we have the ability to sit down and talk sensibly about what can and can't be afforded, about what timeframes might be, about who the eventual owners of facilities might be. So for example, if we inherit the ownership of a facility that is going to cost money to run, then that affects our operational expenditure, our OPEX, going forward. So that's a different story to making a contribution at the front end and not having the operational expenditure because it's going to be operated by someone else, that it doesn't fall to the ratepayer. And so you can see that whether it's the capital expenditure, whether it's the operational expenditure, Christchurch City residents have an interest on both sides of the ledger, but the way that this is resolved can only be by agreement. And we are utterly committed to working with central government to find agreements that are in the best long-term interests of our city. Not short-term, long-term interests of our city. And that's what we're determined to do. There's a bottom line on that one, well, just above the bottom line. Can I draw your attention to horizontal infrastructure? This is the one that has provided a little bit of a challenge to all of us as well. Those two figures combined, 1.14 billion and 1.8 billion from the Crown, they represent each contribution to the repair of the horizontal infrastructure, which are your water, your pipes and your roads. And there's a 60-40 deal on the pipes and an 80-20 split on the roads, just roughly. And the roads one is picked up by the New Zealand Transport Agency, and the 60-40 is with central government, and it's part of an agreement that occurs after a natural disaster under the civil defence arrangements. So it's to be an expected amount. The issue is the amount that it is truly going to cost to repair to the standard that it was prior to the earthquakes. and whether we can use opportunities to better the environment as we go along. The City Council put aside a sum of money to better the environment as we went along. So, for example, if you're down there putting in a new pipe, you might as well put in a bigger pipe, and so the council said we'll pay for the bigger pipe. If that costs a bit more, we'll pay for the bit more, and that was called the Betterment Fund. But it's a bit of a misnomer now as a fund, isn't it? Because it's just more borrowing. It's all borrowing. So, but you know that money was set aside in the budget for specifically that purpose. The difference between what was assessed to be the total cost of the repair and the cost that was entered into with the cost sharing agreement was about $400 million between us and central government. So the council and the government will receive this report by the 1st of December, and that will form the basis for further discussions. Now, that doesn't mean that there will be an additional $400 million. It just means that the amount that we need to solve for will change, or could change, as a result of that particular report. So we need to wait for that report before we know. But that means that in the meantime, we are only working through the issues that fit within this budget until we get to that point. So this is acting as a cap at the moment, but we are not by any means accepting that as a cap right now. It will be renegotiated or reviewed as a result of the independent review. The final slide that I want to deal with is where our funding comes from, and you'll see that it's artificially constructed, really, because although it shows only 23% from rates, 23% is borrowing for earthquake recovery, and I'm afraid that both the interest and the capital ultimately will come from rates. So you can see the extent of borrowing that the council is having to undertake just to make things meet. 29% from earthquake rebuild payments. That's including insurance and including the government's contribution under the cost share agreement for the horizontal infrastructure. So there's a significant amount of what we are doing at the moment that is really being funded somewhat artificially, but then we are doing a lot more than we normally do as a result of the earthquake. So you can see the scale of the problem, and now that I've completely depressed everyone in the room, it's time for me to hand over to Raf to show that there are some solutions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another hospital pass. I seem to be getting a lot of those these days. Okay, we've got various ways of dealing with this problem, and there's no one silver bullet. But we always start with the can we increase rates number just to demonstrate exactly what the problem is. Now, the current forecast, if we don't do anything else apart from increasing rates, we will see rates go up by 27% next year, 27% the year after, and I think 9% for the next couple of years, and probably 9% the year after. So if you get your calculator out, you will see that we'll see us doubling rates in the next 5 years. So what that would mean for the average ratepayer paying around $2,000 per household, their rates would go up to $4,000 a year. So for people on fixed incomes, they're going to have a $2,000 hole in their accounts in the next 5 years, which they're not really going to be able to find the money for. So I mean, that's quite a serious issue. Clearly, the thing about rates is they're easy to collect. It's just another tax, so it's good for the council. It's revenue in the door. It also improves our debt borrowing ratios. So the more revenue we have in, the more that we can borrow. So, you know, rates are clearly going to go up. The question is, how far are they going to go up? At the moment, we're trying to keep them below 10% for the next couple of years. I mean, that's quite hard work. There are other ways of bringing it down, and those are, you know, that's part of the trade-off mix that we will have to consider. But certainly, we'll have to do something apart from just raising rates. The second option is reducing services, and I'd probably change this title, reducing or changing the way we deliver services. So it's not just about saying we're not going to do X, it's actually, can we deliver X in a completely different way? You know, as we're going through this long-term plan process, process at the moment. It's clear that the council is involved in an awful lot of stuff that it doesn't necessarily have to deliver. Other people could deliver it. It could be delivered in different ways. And a lot of these things council are involved in are kind of legacy things. You know, we're in a post-earthquake environment. We're also in a new, modern environment as well. And we actually have to take a close look at everything that council does and ask ourselves the question, is this something that we should be doing? And that's really a question for the whole community to think about. So we want people to really sort of focus on this area and drill down through the website and look at all the various things we do, and then actually say, well, hold on, we could do that differently, or actually council shouldn't be doing that at all. Delaying things actually helps, because when we look at the council's balance sheet, it's a huge balance sheet. We've got over $9 billion worth of assets, and net asset number, which we'll reveal today in the latest annual report, is close to $8 billion. So we've got $8 billion worth of net assets. We're actually a very, very wealthy council. So we don't have to panic. Now, the total debt we will probably end up with will be around $2.2 billion. So that's about 25% of our net assets. So that's actually quite low gearing. So I'm not particularly worried about that, but what we do have is a borrowing peak between 2017 and 2019. We're actually, if we're not careful, we will go over our borrowing limits. Now, one way of dealing with that is flattening that peak, and one way to flatten the peak is actually move out some of the projects that we've got there. So for example, if we took the stadium and shifted it out to 2022, that takes $250 million out of that peak and pushes it further out. So again, when we look down the list of all the capital projects we want to happen, we might actually have to prioritise some of those and say, well, this one is not as important and we can push that one out a little bit further. And as we look actually at the initial capital programme coming through for the long-term plan, that is already heavily oversubscribed on top of what we already have here. So, you know, there's going to be a huge amount of trade-offs. Everyone wants everything now or tomorrow, and the fact is they're not going to get it. So that's another conversation that all our communities need to have with each other. Could we borrow more? Yes and no. I mean, obviously we are bound by local government funding authority requirements around debt ratios, and that sets the limits we can borrow. But as I said before, our balance sheet is very, very strong, and we could easily probably go up a little bit higher to probably $2.5–3 billion in borrowing, but we can't actually do it under the local government funding authority guidelines. There are potentially other ways of using some of our CCHL balance sheet that we could borrow more. But it's not that straightforward. And really, we don't really want to take on more debt than we have to, because obviously we're going to be paying that off over the next 30 years. Could we sell assets? That's a very easy one. I mean, the answer is yes, we could. We have, in CCHL, total equity of about $1.9 billion at the moment. It's very easy to access. But we don't want to just look at it in terms of selling assets and that's it. I mean, clearly, you know, we could sell off the whole lot and have no debt, but actually, there's a lot of assets there that, you know, provide a strategic outcome for the city. So we want to have a more sensible conversation around that, which is actually, could we improve our return from those assets? Now, when we look across the asset base, we've got four major infrastructure companies. We have Orion, which provides electricity lines. We have Enable, which is a growing company providing fibre. We have the port and the airport. Now, the port and the airport are strategically very, very important, but they're slightly different to Enable and Orion in that they're subject to heavy competitive pressures. So what we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years is a consolidation in the ports and airports sector in New Zealand. To give you an example, Auckland has done a tie-up with Queenstown, and what that sees is a lot of traffic bypassing Christchurch and going straight from Auckland to Queenstown, or coming in from the Tasman route into Queenstown. That's actually cost us a lot of money. We've also just seen a tie-up between Tauranga and Timaru. Again, that is diverting traffic away from Port of Lyttelton. Port of Lyttelton lost a contract with Fonterra. All these things are happening outside of our control. So we cannot afford to sit here and just hope that our businesses will do better. They won't, they will get worse. So really the obvious opportunity for us is to look for a strategic partner into the port and the airport so that we can actually grab back some of that business and get more dividends. And just to give you an example, Port of Tauranga is a listed port. The council sold down some of their shareholding. I mean, they're getting huge amount more dividends from the smaller stake than when they had the full 100% stake. And the value of the company's gone up by 4 times. So we shouldn't just think about selling assets, we should actually think about how we're going to get these businesses to work better and return more money to the city. The other three companies, we've got CityCare, Redbus, EcoCentral. EcoCentral is kind of infrastructure, it's a waste company, it is a commercial organisation, but it's quite small and it sort of fits into, I guess, a bigger strategic picture about what we do with waste. CityCare is a pure commercial contracting company. There's really no strategic value. They do a great job, they're a great company, but really there's no strategic argument that we can make for holding on to CityCare. They operate all over the country, they're actually winning contracts off other councils, so they're not particularly happy. And Redbus, simply a bus company, which is in a way caused us problems with creating a single transport authority for the council, because we've been seen as a regulator and an operator of buses, which actually has held us back. So when we look at all of those companies, you actually have to divide them up into different pods and see that they're actually different types of organisations. So when you have the conversation, it's not just shall we sell assets or shall we not sell assets, it's actually how are we going to get a better return for the ratepayers. So, there's no simple solution, but there is a solution. And hopefully once people start to work through this stuff, start to look at the solutions, drill down into the website and have a look at the more detailed information, and hopefully at some point we will have a budget calculator up on the website, so you can actually play around with some numbers where you say, hey, if we take 300 from this, or spend 300 less on this, or put rates up 50% or 2% or whatever, and you see what the number is that comes out at the other end. So everyone should be able to get involved in this, and hopefully we will have some interactivity on the website, putting pressure on whoever's doing that job. The important thing is that people get involved in the conversation and realise actually, treat this like your own household budget. It's no more complicated than that. And hopefully we will have the tools on the website so that everyone can take part in that conversation. Thank you.
Right, so I think we've got a slide that tells you where you can register online. So some of these dates are slightly slippage. We didn't factor in the general election there, and thought we shouldn't be out chatting to people during the general election period, because we thought it might just create additional confusion for people. But we do need to make a consideration November, December, and the formal LTP consultation process is March, April next year. So we're on a bit of a tight time frame, but we're working, I think, quite quickly, and did want to open this up to a more gentle conversation from the outset. I'm very mindful of the fact that a number of councillors signed pledges on the sale of assets, and we need the people of Christchurch to understand that it isn't a simple choice between selling assets and not selling assets, that inviting strategic partners to play a role in improving company performance, or for other reasons playing a role, actually is just as important, and probably more important than actually the financial return to the council. So, or the immediate financial return to the council. When I use the example of Orion, 11% of Orion is already owned by Selwyn District Council. Is it selling assets if we ask them to take up an additional few shares? So it isn't a simple question of selling assets or not selling assets. It's a question of how do we get the best possible return for the city, but also taking a regional perspective as well, the long-term benefits of the region. So I hope that's food for thought. I'm sorry I'm not focused on everyone so well this morning. I've come down with a bit of a virus, so I'm seeing all of you in double, so this room looks much more crowded than it actually is. So I think we're going to hand over to someone, to Hamish, to take over from here.
We've just changed the order of Hamish, just go.
So what is the CCC doing to link the university campus to the city via cycleways to get students back into the city? And also, what does the council have planned to retain UC graduates once they've graduated?
Yeah, we're building a secret tunnel from the Undercroft through to this building there. It's part of the new drainage system. I have no idea. Is Councillor Clearwater with us? No? Okay. Well, they're building a cycle route from the university. I think it's called Unicycle. Is it? Yeah. So that will hopefully allow students to cycle in smoothly through the park. In terms of retaining graduates, I think it's pretty simple actually. We have to create a dynamic city with lots of job opportunities and lots of recreational opportunities. I mean, ultimately, if you think about why people live in a city, I mean, why did I move here from London to Christchurch? Because it's a great place to live. And I think we need to, for our graduates to make it a great place to live. So when we look at, the mountain bike park on the Port Hills, when we look at some of the proposals we're getting around the Red Zone and the Avon River are just incredible. I mean, this would be an amazing city to live. But actually, we also have to have jobs. No jobs, then you're not going to keep your graduates, end of story. So the economic development aspect is really crucial, and that's something that we'll be working quite strongly on.
There's, it seems to me that our future really is going to really depend on who's going to be living here, and we've got the people who decided to stay after the earthquakes. We've got those that come here and decide to stay, and we've got future generations. Now, young people sort of have this habit of going away for a big OE, so I don't think we should shy away from that. But we need to have a reason for them to come home, and I think it's great that people travel, and it's great that they've got all of this international experience, and then all of the international contacts that they bring back, and they're part of international networks often as a result of being away and coming back. So that's incredibly healthy. But for them to be telling the story about why they're going back all the time while they're away will simply reinforce to the world that this is going to be one of the great places to live. And that to me is the challenge that we have ahead of us, is at the same time that we're struggling with all of the financials, we have to be focused on the fact that this is an enormous opportunity to leave a legacy, not based on the earthquake, but based on our response to it. The opportunities are boundless, and I've been quoting Rahm Emanuel, who was the Chief of Staff for the US President, and he's now the Mayor of Chicago. And he said, never let a serious crisis go to waste. But it's not for that expression that I quote him. The next bit of the sentence goes, I say that because it's an opportunity to do things you never thought you could do before. And that's our real opportunity here in Christchurch. If you think of what people report about Christchurch right now, Lonely Planet, New York Times, the whole 9 yards, what they're talking about is the transition. It's what's happening in the life and vacant spaces space. It's what's happening with gap filler, and it's what's happening with Restart More, and it's what's happening with all of those quirky, unusual, experimental, creative, innovative things that are giving a sense of place to this city that we haven't been known for in the past. And that's what I think is going to attract our young people to stay and to come back.
So this is quite a long question. There are a lot of community needs in a post-earthquake environment, and there does not seem to be a clear definition of what the Council has determined it has financial responsibility for. In terms of community funding, what strategic thinking has been done or is planned to ensure the Council, the community and the community sector are clear about what is prioritised as a Council responsibility and how much it can afford to make available?
We're setting up a small working group of councillors to start to work through the community funding program. So we do have a funding program, significant funding program for community groups. It's never enough on its own to address issues. And in fact, a number of community groups will tell us that they apply to our funds, they then apply to the community trust, and then they apply to something else, and they start to apply to something else. And in fact, a lot of administrative staff within NGOs spend a considerable amount of their time applying for money to do what they do, not applying for money, but doing the rest of what they do. And so we're setting up this group to start looking at whether we can get a much better approach, which is to resource communities to do things for themselves, so that they're not having to spend time and time again applying for things, which actually costs a significant amount of money for the council to administer these multiple applications every year. And then people develop a sense of expectation that they can rely on a certain amount coming from council. So if there's any cut in the budget, then all of a sudden their whole system gets thrown out of kilter. So finding ways to resource communities, because quite often all communities need to be actively engaged in anything, a project, community gardens, Project Littleton, you know, anything like that. Often it's just the pay for the one paid coordinator that it requires to keep the system going. And then the voluntary effort actually becomes utterly meaningful because it is not engaged in fundraising for the fundraiser, if you see what I mean. So we're trying to find a better way of supporting communities, and I know this will drive people nuts because it's my favourite word, but it is building resilience within communities so that they are able to address their community in a very upfront and personal way, in a much more, and focus their activities on building community rather than applying for money. And I remember, I can see Bill sitting there at the back table, so I'm going to mention him. I remember going to the opening of the South Brighton Community Centre that the local community opened, not 1 cent of council government money. There, the community did it for themselves, they got sponsorship, they got all sorts of different things. And you just think, well, people that are able to do that, you know, one, their blood's worth bottling, but two, that is so much more community building than just handing out grants. It's much more community building to enable the community to look after itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good conversation to have, because when I look at the council, I think it's become way too paternalistic, and it's a bit of a kind of mummy and daddy handout process. I think the job of council, I mean, and it is a statutory requirement, is to provide infrastructure. So I see our job as providing the community spaces, so the parks, providing community facilities, the pools, the libraries, community halls, in the most efficient way. And then I think our job is really to provide the community with the means to do what it needs to do for itself. So when we look at some of the funding changes we've made, where we're actually saying to people, well, here's a budget for X. It could be a library, it could be a paddling pool, whatever. Now you take that and you go and partner with your community to build what you want to build. So it's trying to sort of switch more from a traditional community funding model to a more social enterprise model, where we provide the basic core infrastructure for people in the community space, as well as roads and all the rest of it, and then allow communities to get on and plan and determine their own futures. And then it actually, in a way, it sparks people living in those communities, or people from those communities who may live somewhere else these days, to think, oh, we need to get involved if this is going to happen. So I think that's quite important.
So in January this year, Dunedin City Council became the first New Zealand council to divest from fossil fuel and adopt an ethical investment policy, which will exclude it from owning shares in tobacco, gambling and pornography industry, as well as fossil fuel extraction. We would like to know whether the CCC would also consider joining this divestment movement.
I have to defer to
Well, we did look at taking over Calendar Girls, but that deal fell through. Look, I mean, clearly we've only got 7 companies. Everyone knows what they were. I think what you've got to be a little bit careful here. It's one thing having an ethical investment policy if you're a fund manager. We're not a fund manager. We just happen to own infrastructure assets which have been in the community for a long time. We're not looking to buy any more businesses. I think the divesting from fossil fuels, I think that's actually a pretty silly idea. If we were even to contemplate that, we might as well shut the airport down and the port down straight away. and shut down city care. I mean, it's just a little bit daft. I mean, I'm not sure why Dunedin City Council have done that. I don't know if they're an active fund manager. I doubt it very much. It's one thing to say we want to be as carbon efficient as possible, because that's something that we can do. Do we want to look at whether we can promote, switching to electric vehicles, for example? That's something we could look at. We've got an electricity lines company which would benefit quite a lot from a switch to electric vehicles. But we're not a fund manager, so I don't really think that that applies to us. But we try to be as ethical as possible, whilst making as much money as possible.
So this one for Rafe. You've spoken publicly about CCC exploring being part of the establishment of a complementary currency in Christchurch that would be linked to our rates. What will happen, or where is this at, and where are you at and where is the CCC at with this concept?
We are scoping out a feasibility study for this. Community currencies, complementary currencies are not new, they've been around for a long, long time. There's many examples all around the world. I think what we're looking to do differently here, and we've just put it into a draft long-term plan piece, is actually link rates back to community work. Now, I don't think there is any example of a rates-backed currency anywhere in the world, in other words, where you can actually pay your rates. The Isle of Man is looking at accepting Bitcoin payments for local taxes. And in a way, Bitcoin's a good example, and all the other cryptocurrencies. Now, because this hasn't been done before, there's bound to be some resistance, but it's quite a simple process. So I think what we will do is we'll do a feasibility study, and then we'll maybe set up some pilot schemes. I've already had a lot of people approach me, especially retired guys over 65 sitting at home, can't wait to get the lawnmower out and go and rev around some of the parks. Now, at the same time, we're trying to reduce some of our parks maintenance. A lot of people are complaining that the grass is too high, that the parks aren't being maintained enough. There's a whole dad's army out there, waiting to go. And I think that this is an issue we have as a society. People are living a lot longer. They're well capable of doing stuff post 65, but a lot of them may find it difficult to get full-time employment. Well, there's a lot of work they could be doing in the community. And we should be able to pay for that in the way that we can, which is through a rates rebate. Now, there are issues around income tax, GST, health and safety, and all the rest of it. But we want to approach this so that we don't get bound up in red tape. But I think it would be quite a cool thing to do, and it's quite easy, to make it happen. So that's where we are.
Now, it's 9 o'clock, and I'm mindful that a lot of you will have to get away, and that these two have
Use the
got
speaker, please, Nicole.
Oh, sorry. It's 9 o'clock, and I'm mindful that many of you will have to get away to where you need to be. That was the end of, they were the questions that was submitted from the people attending this meeting. Lianne and Rev have got a council meeting in a few, have to go to a council meeting in a few minutes. If there are any other questions that people have and they're not able to be answered today, then feel free to send them in.